All right, welcome to video 15. We'll talk about sustainable agriculture. So we had our introduction to sustainability and what it is, and now we'll look at some of the agricultural methods that can be done to be more sustainable. Now, the goal of sustainable agriculture is to feed the world's population, but not destroy the land or hurt the environment and reduce biodiversity. So we need to look at the needs of the people and the needs of food production while also looking at the negative impacts to the environment to lower them. Of course, doing this will require more labor. Now, one of the methods that's done for this is contour plowing, where you plow and harvest along the contours of the land instead of clearing out an area and specifically harming the soil. You use the contours of the land in your own benefit, which can slow soil erosion. Another method is putting in windbreaks. So you can see from the image there, and the one on the bottom that shows you kind of the diagram. But the idea is that you create a break that stops the wind, which slows soil erosion through wind. You can also plant perennial crops, which don't need to be reseeded or replanted every year. So you don't need to have annual plowing, which can harm the soil. You don't need as many herbicide applications to establish them. And you can just grow them and they'll just continue to produce year after year for you. Terracing can also be done where you have wide flat steps of that are constructed on slopes so that you can use sloped areas for growing plants. And this again prevents erosion. There is also a method of no-till agriculture. So this is an example of soybeans growing into corn stalk remnants in Union County, Iowa. Some of the benefits here is that there's less erosion and less oxidation because you're not tilling the area. The drawback, though, is that there's an increase of herbicides because there are weeds that are going to grow to compete. Strip cropping can also be done where you take two crops that work together synergistically and plant them next to each other. For instance, corn requires a lot of nitrogen, and peas will actually fix the nitrogen, so they give the nitrogen off to the corn so that the corn gets the nutrients they need because of the peas. Some other things you can do that will improve soil fertility is rotating your crops. The idea here is that by rotating your crops, you're reducing the specific demands on that soil of one particular type of nutrient. And the idea is that you use plants that will prepare the soil for the next crop, for instance, like peas and then corn, because the peas will allow the nitrogen to be fixed for the corn to then use the nitrogen. But you rotate the crops in a manner that allows for the nutrients to be recycled and leave nutrients behind for the next crop. So you would start with legumes and then use root plants, then plant fruit plants, and then leaves, which leave the nutrients for legumes again in a rotational method. You can also use green manure, which is just animal and plant waste that's used as fertilizer instead of synthetics, the idea of composting. Now, before you just throw some of those manure wastes out, the idea here is there are certain wastes that are safe and certain wastes that are not. This is important for you if you have your own little garden at home. You can't put cat and dog waste into your soil because it's not safe for plants to grow. But horses and cows and chickens and rabbits and goats and sheep, all of that manure is safe. And then it's a maybe on pig manure because pig manure can be contaminated. Limestone can also be added to neutralize acidic soil. It's a little more natural as opposed to removing the soil completely. The calcium carbonate in the limestone neutralizes acidic soil, which allows the soil to uptake nutrients in a more efficient manner because acidic soil will use up a lot of the acidic soil will use up a lot of the nutrients in the soil that the plants need. The practice of rotational grazing is the idea that you move your grazing areas from one area to the next and allow those areas to come back before you graze on them again, as opposed to just completely wiping out an area by grazing it. So this image shows you what it is. You start by having an area of a large pasture, you typically break them into paddocks where they're moved 50% to 70%. Once 50% or 70% of the cover has been removed, allowing for some of that cover to come back. You then move them to an area that has had more regrowth, and they would then use up that area while other areas are able to grow back. And this cycle helps keep your livestock healthier because there's more natural processes. You don't have to use nutritional additives, and it allows your grazing land to continue to produce. Now, when we talk about organics mean that no synthetic pesticides or fertilizers are used. So synthetic, remember, is chemically produced. And organic agriculture, if something is deemed as agriculture, it might have pesticides and fertilizers, but they can't be synthetic. This was created in 1990 with the Farm Bill, and it was the Organic Foods Production Act. It obviously is going to increase the labor costs, but they can then sell their foods higher, which can recover some of those costs. Organic has become very popular and has grown quite a lot since 2002. You can see from this graph that organic, and you probably know just from going to the store, organic is becoming very hip and is the new thing. So another method is free-range beef and chicken versus, remember, having them in a CAFO where you have feedlots. The benefits are that there's ethical and humane treatment of animals, fewer antibiotics or medications, not as much fossil fuel use, and the animal waste is then recycled back into the land instead of having to be disposed. Now, there are negatives associated. It does require much more land because you have to allow them for more grazing land, and the costs are much higher. That brings us to the end of our 15th video on sustainable agriculture. Our next video will be all about aquaculture.